Hey there folks, it's me the Tactical Brit, and Beyond the Wire has been relatively quiet over the last couple of months. We haven't really heard much from the game beyond the odd blog post looking at character skins and things like that, and a few map designs and engine screenshots, stuff that we kind of expect to see at this point, but most of it is sort of in-engine assets. Well, today we've had our first look at actual gameplay of the game from a first-person perspective. Everything prior to this has really sort of been, sort of spectator camera view or something of that variety, and for the first time now we're having a look at actual in-game weaponry firing, as well as some support elements as well, which is really cool. Now, whilst things have been relatively quiet with Beyond the Wire, they have been operating a second alpha test. Of course, that's still under NDA, so nobody can really share it, but there are some details in this video that I do want to talk about because it's pretty cool, and I'm very excited for this title, and I can't wait to see it in early access later this year. So let's start with the support elements, because I guess this is a big question lots of people have, like what will actually be in Beyond the Wire, how is it going to function? And we have three different types of support elements being shown off. We've got the artillery barrage, we also have a chlorine gas barrage, we have a smoke barrage, and I think that's more or less it for now. We don't know whether these are going to work in sort of generic dumbfire variants, or if it's going to be a rolling barrage that covers a certain space, but what we do know are some interesting details. Number one, to start with the artillery barrage, the explosions you're seeing are very much post-scriptum squad style explosions, really detailed, look fantastic, great audio. But a really impressive detail to note is that all of these appear to be triggered by some kind of flare. And I do believe that this is a flare gun emplacement that's going to be harbored by the commander or some kind of leader of the section or faction at the specific time that's able to fire these artillery barrages in support. And this is actually quite an interesting limiting factor, because before on games like Postscriptum and Squad, where you could effectively call these things in more or less anywhere, in this game you actually have to be within physical firing distance of a flare gun to make such a play happen, and that's a cool element, I think. Next up is the chlorine gas phase, and this is actually quite cool. It's kind of an area denial device, it's not going to do direct infantry damage on impact, but ultimately if you don't have a gas mask equipped, you will die. This is going to be a great opportunity for sort of trench clearing, but also just the ability to cause confusion and chaos on an objective. You can imagine when the enemy troops are dug in on a trench, calling in one of these barrages is going to offer you a great window of opportunity to get up front, close and personal with gas masks on, and raid something that not only causes visual decay to the actual enemies and cuts off sight lines as a smoke barrage, but also causes them damage if they're not prepared for the actual impact. So really interesting things going on here with the chlorine gas. I'm interested to see how it's going to work dynamically across the game. One thing to note that I thought was quite interesting is that the barrage itself actually isn't that big. I would have thought it would have been a little bit larger considering the size of the artillery, for example, but the chlorine gas barrage seems to be very strategic. It's not a large call-in, but it will cover a sort of a medium to small space, like a main segment of a trench or something like a bunker, but really interesting to see. Finally, we have the smoke barrage, and that's very simplistic. It does the job. You can call it in, block off some sight lines, and maybe raid some trenches. Now let's talk about the weapons, and this is where things get interesting. We have the French faction and the German faction here in both of their weapons, and let's start with the French. We have the Lebel 1886 M93 rifle, a real classic that a lot of you will remember, and it looks great. It's got this really great animation. The shots look very lethal. It's a good kick. These are very reminiscent of gunplay engagements in Postscriptum. I think they're very similar in that sense. It kind of strikes me as that kind of rifle gameplay. There's good magnification on the iron sights as well to cover a fair amount of distance, seeing as very few, if not probably only one person in the team will be able to have a scope. So ultimately all the engagements are going to be done via iron sights, and it does look really good. I'm really excited. The animations look very clean, and it's come to sort of what we expect from a squad / Postscriptum standard. The same principle applies across all of the French weapons here. We have the Chauchat LMG. This looks really interesting because they've actually only shown it as a mounted emplacement. Something I think is going to become predominantly clear to stop people trench sniping and moving through trenches and just absolutely rinsing them with automated weapons, is that you'll likely only see LMGs work very well in actual emplacement situations. If you're running around trying to hip fire it, it's not going to go well for you. And I think you're seeing that with a lot of the the scope sway on the weapons, it seems to be quite heavy, implying that you will need to either stop, change stance, or get into some kind of firing position to really make a good impact. We're seeing the same here with the Lebel Sniper, quite a lot of scope sway. You know, this is the only class that has a scope, and even that has the ability to just sort of take you off your shot if you're not crouched and ready for this engagement. So interesting mechanics, interesting takes on things. I think that the Sure Shot is obviously something that they're being very careful with in LMGs in general, and it seems to be, to me, that they want this to be a balanced game, and that's a good indication off of first glances. We also have the pistols. We've got the revolver and the ruby. These look great. Pistols will likely be primary weapons in this game, not secondaries, as pistols were in World War I. You'll likely see these apply to things maybe like Trench Raider classes, possibly Squad Leader classes. These are the kinds of places where, you know, you're going to be giving somebody immense amounts of firepower, because, you know, a pistol in World War I is effectively one of the few auto/semi-auto weapons in the field. Next up, we're getting a good look at the German weapons, and we have the Gewehr 1898 rifle. Looks fantastic, much like the Lebel. Really good optical zoom in on the iron sight, and again, these are your standard issue bolt action rifles. They look good, they do the job. They're likely to be highly lethal in one shot. We also have the Mazden M1905. Again, they interestingly only show it bipoded. I think this is deliberate. I think they're almost implying to some degree that these LMGs are not going to work particularly well if not bipoded. Next we have the P08 pistol. Again, another same principle. Looks fantastic. Again, likely to be the Trench Raider class. The iron sights are surprisingly quite close to your face and also relatively zoomed in as well. So really, really interesting to see on the German faction. A good level of parity. We seem to have, you know, guns across the board that seem to, you know, mimic each other in terms of balancing. So I don't expect to see any major faction balancing differences. The same applies to the Gewehr 1898 with the actual scope, which interestingly kind of looks like an ACOG, but it's actually really cool. Again, same principle here, lots of scope sway. It appears that this is the kind of thing where you need to be prone, laying down, or crouched, or in some kind of decent firing position, and again, replicates a lot of what the Lebel does. We also have the Pistol 08, but this one is actually the Luger instead of the P08. I believe this one has the sort of drum-style magazine and stock. That's likely going to be utilized by squad leaders again. In World War I, when you're clearing trenches, a very, very powerful weapon. We also get a look at some of the grenades as well, which is actually really, really cool. We actually haven't seen a lot of this before. The grenades seem to have the same principles applied to them as Postscriptum, same explosion, same kind of blast radius, same kind of effects. Although it was really cool to see sort of what's traditionally known as the anti-tank grenade, which is, you know, just a cluster of grenades that has a much larger explosion. And I imagine you will likely see this used in infantry scenarios by sort of like a trench clearing class or sort of an explosive style class, because it just seemingly has an obscene amount of grenades and damage. You can see that he actually switches to the smoke grenade and has this sort of in-hand cluster grenade as well. So effectively that to me screams a trench raiding class, a pistol, grenades and smoke, you know. But overall, again, you know, really good balancing I think you're going to see in this game. Lots of, you know, you can never claim that one faction is more powerful than the other. I think this entire game, you know, Beyond the Wire is going to be very, very down to the T in gunplay. So yeah, that's your first look at weapons firing in a first-person perspective in Beyond the Wire, really, and I believe they were on the Passchendaele map throughout that entire video. But yeah, it's just super impressive to see. You know, the gunplay looks super tight. We still don't have much inclinations about the melee system. We know there are bayonets. Allegedly, there are some, you know, sort of weapons that you'll have in hand as well. We're likely going to see things like shovels, hatchets, that kind of thing. But ultimately, really impressive, you know, just from the French and the German faction alone, we're expected to see a lot. We know, of course, that the Americans are also going to take center stage at some point. We will likely see future factions as well in the future. So really just lots and lots of different things coming into play here. Lots of stuff that I think it's going to tie in well. This game seems to be very reminiscent of Postscriptum and Squad in the sense of how gunplay works. The audio, the visual effects, of course, are all the same because it's running off of the same engine. And ultimately, that's a very high standard of gameplay. You know, we've got sort of AAA levels of audio and graphical design and, you know, really punchy gunplay that looks very well thought out and very well balanced. You know, it seems incredibly obvious to me that people are going to have to be standing, crouching, prone, or in some kind of fire position. You won't just be able to sort of mad lad run and gun it across the field. So overall, really impressed with Beyond the Wire. I think this is going to be a standout game going into early access this year. Very excited to cover it, very excited to stream it. And I promise you guys, the second I'm able to show you more gameplay, the first instance of opportunity you guys will see. You know, the second I can show it, you'll see it. It will be on my YouTube, or it will be on my live streams, wherever it happens to be. Thank you guys for watching. Leave a sub if you're interested in seeing more of this content, and I'll catch you again in the next video.